The CEO of Maple Leaf Foods rants on Twitter about Iran and Trump. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Now, the Iran situation is still fresh in a lot of people's minds. That was a massive disaster, a massive blunder by the Iranian government, and led to the death of over 60 Canadians. It was truly a national tragedy. It brought the country together, and recently, the CEO of Maple Leaf Foods gave his opinion on the matter. I'm just going to read you his opinion first, and then after we'll break it down. So he actually hopped on to his company's Twitter page and ranted on there. Not his personal account. He he infused the corporate entity with his politics, which is rarely a good idea, but in this case we'll give him a pass because it seemed to me that he was highly emotional after the loss of one of his colleagues. So, he writes this: I'm Michael McCain, CEO of Maple Leaf Foods, and these are personal reflections. Posted on his corporate account, I must add. So, I'm very angry, and time isn't making me less angry. A MLF colleague, that's Maple Leaf Food colleague of mine, lost his wife and family this week to a needless, irresponsible series of events in Iran. Oh, actually, I take it back. I think I said it was he lost his colleague. He is mourning for the loss that his colleague experienced. So, he continues, the US government leaders, unconstrained by checks and balances, concocted an ill-conceived plan to divert focus from political woes. The world knows Iran is a dangerous state, but the world found a path to contain it. Not perfect, but by most accounts it was the right direction. A narcissist in Washington tears world accomplishments apart, destabilizes regions. US now unwelcomed everywhere in the region, including Iraq. Tensions escalated to feverish pitch, taking out despicable military leader terrorist, ? There are 100 like him standing next in line, and as you can see, these are his exact words. He gets a little bit incoherent near the end, and he continues, the collateral damage of this irresponsible, dangerous, ill-conceived behavior? 63 Canadians needlessly lost their lives in the crossfire, including the family of one of my colleagues, his wife, plus their 11-year-old son. We are mourning, and I am livid. Michael McCain. So, a very emotional pitch there. Some things he says are right, others not so much. It's a mixed bag here. So, let's try and break this down and try to explain what exactly he's trying to get across to us. The first thing we can all agree upon is the aspect of tragedy. So his colleague lost his wife and his child. A lot of people lost family members on this plane. Canada mourns for all of them. This is true. It was a terrible event which was brought about by Iran's negligence. That's where we differ in placing blame, but we'll get to that in a second. Still on this aspect of tragedy, it brings the country together, and we are here to support each other. It actually is quite a remarkable thing. Canadians were in unity in this matter. We all recognize it's a terrible thing, and a lot of people are grieving for this, and in that regard, I offer my condolences to McCain. It's important to separate politics from personal humanity for a little bit here. He's going through a loss right now. One of his colleagues who he seems to care about is suffering, and so we can expect him to be a little bit emotional, and I think that's what led to him posting these tweets on the corporate account. He was trying to have his voice heard, and that's probably the best platform for it. If he has a personal account, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be to the same amount of followers that the corporate one has. So, he wanted to maximize his reach and he wanted to vent. If that helps him to get his emotions together, then that's fine. But, as you know, we do have to hold the argument in a separate regard. We have to break it down a little bit. So there we go. I said my piece about the emotional side. Now let's move on to the meat of what he's trying to say. He regards the entire debacle as something that is needless. That's debatable in and of itself. It depends how you view the Quds Force under Soleimani. It depends on what you understand about the nature of that individual. The fact of the matter is, as I outlined in a previous episode, Soleimani was a terrorist in charge of a terrorist regime, the Quds Force, that funds further terror in the Middle East. It's a never-ending chain of terror with this organization. They're a separate military wing of the Iranian government forces. Soleimani was a bad guy. He was carrying out bad things. I don't think it's needless to take him out. What was in question, though, is the method that they chose to go about doing it. This is where McCain makes a good point. He talks about the checks and balances that were not fulfilled. I think this was a misstep on the American government's part. Congress should have been informed and they should have debated about the best tactical approach. Canada should have been brought in as well for intel and backup. America acted quickly on this, which would have been necessary given an immediate threat, but this situation did not seem like something that couldn't have waited a little bit. In fact, it could have benefited from some careful planning, a more well thought out approach, and getting some allies on board. That is the beauty of debate. You present an idea and you hear opposition. Then the opposition is going to strengthen your own ideas. If Trump came forward and said, "We plan on droning Soleimani as he leaves the Iraq airport," what do you think about that? Maybe people could have given him another suggestion, another path forward that could have potentially not led to such escalation with Iran while still accomplishing their mission, getting rid of Soleimani. Maybe there was a trade they could have made. Maybe there was a more tactical approach. Maybe Canada could have been informed so we could have advised our citizens not to travel to Iran right now. There's a lot of possibilities here, but these were not acted on because America acted in a swift fashion. And that swift fashion, as I've said, is needed in a certain type of situation, but I don't think this was it. It's not as if Soleimani was in the midst of creating a bomb to destroy the world or something, and you had 2 hours to kill him. This was something that could have waited a little bit. I share the same sentiments as McCain when it comes to upholding the rule of law and having an organized procedure in government to make sure that no one person has too much power. Having a president who can engage in conflict at their own whims without addressing elected officials does not seem correct to me and should only be applied in the rarest of circumstances. So there is some legitimate criticism of the regime. So, he then goes on to say that Iran is a dangerous state, but the world found a way to contain it. What he is referencing there is the nuclear deal, and you could say that is the crux of the entire issue here and stems back to many years ago actually. This is not new. The long story short is that Iran was intrigued at the prospect of nuclear weapons, and the world didn't take too kindly to that. It wasn't just America, it was members of the EU as well, and they sat down with Iran. They imposed sanctions against them to cripple their economy, and they said that if you want to make money again, if you want to sit down at the big boys table, you're going to have to give us some type of ground when it comes to nuclear weapons. We don't want you to have one, so let's make a deal. Essentially, Iran made billions of dollars off that deal via the lifting of sanctions, and in return, they went from a state where they could create a nuke within 3 months to a state where they could create a nuke within 1 year. We put limits on the amount of enriched uranium that they can have, and there is time constraints as well. One of the glaring issues with the nuclear deal, though, is these time constraints. Some of the clauses only lasted for 10 years. Others lasted for 15. It was not a long-term deal. It was inevitable that the issue would come up again in the near future. Once the agreement ended, Iran would be free to do what they wanted to do because the terms no longer applied to them. You would be forced to negotiate again, and now they'd be way richer though. They may be more unlikely to buy into your terms because they have power now. They have billions of dollars and they are a major force in the Middle East because of the money presumably. They are able to expand and invest. This idea that the nuclear deal was not perfect is exactly correct, and McCain recognized that, but he thinks that it was the right path. Of course it was the right path, but there was some distinct issues that you can identify within it. I'm not convinced it was a good deal, period, and we would realize that when the deal ended. Trump pulled out of it early, and that skyrocketed tensions between Iran and America. Then McCain goes on to say that America took out a despicable military terrorist, which is correct, but he says there are hundreds more in line. So it was useless. That's what he's trying to get at, and to that the answer is no. This is what deterrence is about, and that's the strategy that America is administering to Iran. It counters that notion. So that is probably true. There are a lot of people who are eager to take Soleimani's place. Maybe some are worse than him, maybe some aren't as bad. But America set a precedent here. If you put him in a position, someone like Soleimani, and you continue to fund terror, you will die. There will be consequences brought against you. Now you can continue to do that if you want, but it's not going to be easy for you. Actually, it's going to be devastating because we took out your commander this time. Next time, it might be harder hits. We could increase sanctions against you. We could destroy your economy. There's a lot of ways to keep someone in line. Just because they're crazy doesn't mean there aren't ways to incentivize them to behave. And that's the idea behind this attack here. Letting Soleimani run free and do what he wants is actually what McCain is afraid of. Then people would just do whatever they wanted. If Soleimani died by natural causes, then yes, there would be someone who replaces him who feels free to act how they want. But now, there's the threat of America looming over their head. That is what deterrence is. It feels like McCain acknowledges that Iran has some type of involvement in this debacle, but he places the majority of the blame on America for the plane going down in Iran that killed 63 Canadians. The fact of the matter is, he's losing his grip with that argument. He doesn't really present the most coherent facts to back it up. The reality of the matter is, Iran shooting down a passenger plane in their capital, that is Iran's fault. They did not close off the airspace as their fault. They could not differentiate between a threat and people on vacation. That is their fault. They pushed the button to send the missiles out. The first degree of responsibility, and that is what matters, is within Iran. It is their fault. McCain plays the rabbit hole game to no avail. He's essentially making the claim that the further back you go, the more you realize that it's America's fault. And his case is, if America didn't kill Soleimani, nobody would have died. But here, let's play this game here. So, Iran killed the people. But no, he's saying that it's America's fault because they put Iran in a situation to kill people. Well, take a step back then. It's Iran's fault for putting America in a position to put Iran in a further position because Iran was doing things like pushing terror and targeting embassies. Then you say, oh no, take it back one step further than that. And as you can see, the further back you go, the more absurd your claims become. The first degree of responsibility is what matters here. It's not determinism, and he seems to be making that kind of case. That America was the cause and everything after that was an effect that was bound to happen. Iran had no control and they're simply a victim in all of this too. It's not true. It's a very interesting argument because it presents to you a true premise, a valid idea, but it doesn't mean that it is inherently connected to the theme at hand. If America didn't kill Soleimani, nobody would have died. Yes, that's probably true, but it's not correlated to the degree of responsibility here. It's an absurd claim to be making. It doesn't hold up to any type of logical scrutiny. It falls apart immediately. Here are two examples of something similar that you can make the same argument that McCain is making for. Let's say that you're on the street and some guy walks up to you and he tries to rob you. Then, in a defensive mechanism, you punch him. Now he walks home and he's very upset. He's emotional. He's on high guard because he just got punched, and he gets home, and on his way there's a newspaper boy, and the newspaper boy is acting weirdly. He can't ride his bike properly, and he comes kind of close to this guy who is all rattled up. Now, the guy in his emotional state freaks out, and he punches the kid in the face, and he kills the kid. Whose fault is it? It is obviously the person who committed the punch that killed the victim. It's their fault. That is the first degree of responsibility. Now you can make the claim, oh, he was in that state of mind because of his encounter with the previous guy, and it's the previous guy's fault, because if he didn't do anything, that guy wouldn't have been heightened, and he wouldn't have punched that kid on the bike. Well, that's the second degree, but you can say, oh no, take it back a step further to the third degree. If that person didn't try to rob the guy in the first place, he wouldn't have got punched, and he wouldn't have been in that state of mind to kill the kid after. You can keep bringing this back and back and back, and you can get to the point where you say, this is all God's fault for creating people in the first place, or, if you're non-religious, it was the Big Bang's fault for enabling people to evolve. It's nonsense. You can't go that far back into the rabbit hole. Otherwise, there's no logic to your claims anymore. You have to recognize where responsibility is due. You also had a very interesting lawsuit happen in America this past year. There was somebody who used a gun to kill people, and the gun company, the people who manufacture the gun, were being brought to court over that. So, somebody bought your product and they used it in a way that was, you could say, ill-intended. They wanted to hurt someone with it. The gun company says, we make this gun for self-defense. If somebody uses it vainly, then that's on them. It's a very interesting precedent because if that gun company is found guilty, it sets this illogical way of thinking where it doesn't matter what the intent of the first person was anymore. It only matters the outcome. And you can bring it back to that second and third degree of responsibility and hold them accountable for an action that you caused. The reality is the person who pulled the trigger is at fault there. It's completely their problem. Now, of course, if there was no guns in the world, then yeah, you wouldn't have been able to shoot anybody, but it's not a realistic claim to be making. There is no pragmatism in that. It's just a fantasy world where you start thinking back and playing the determinist game. How about if I drive a car and run somebody over? Is it the car manufacturer's fault? This is where you go when you start playing the rabbit hole. The gun manufacturer did not hold your hand and pull the trigger for you, just as America didn't take Iran's hand and put it over the button for them. Now, the CEO of Maple Leaf Foods is entitled to his opinion, and it's great that he's sharing, but it's a mixed bag of conjecture and some truth. Overall, he is attributing responsibility inadequately. There is levels to this, and the more removed you become, the more ridiculous you seem. Now, I want to offer my condolences again to McCain, because he's mourning the loss of a colleague's wife and that child. It's important that we don't let politics take away from humanity all the time. This seems to me a raw emotional response on his behalf. He hopped onto this company's Twitter account and put up his monologue. If it helps him cope, I'm glad it happened. If it helps the victim feel better, I am glad it happened. Separating the points he made from his personal situation, though, is where I make a distinction. From a personal perspective, I sympathize with him, but the arguments he presented, not so much. Also, Trudeau has handled the situation quite well. Since we're on the topic, he is demanding answers and holding firm without pushing too hard. It really does appear to have been accidental, and for those who are demanding that we go to war with Iran or take revenge, that's not wise either. The intent is the key here, and although horrible, further casualties are not desirable when it appears to be a mistake. Now, looking to the future, McCain hinted at what I think is likely to set the stage for the next conflict between America, Iran, and the world. The nuclear deal is torn up now. Nobody in their right mind wants Iran to be armed with a nuke. Actually, it's the opposite. If you are logical, you want nukes to be slowly phased out, because these are the tools that can bring about an apocalypse on Earth. That deal, the nuclear deal, was supposed to curb Iran. The effectiveness is debatable, but having no deal is clearly worse. If they begin enriching uranium and pushing their military programs, that's going to require immediate action. You look at a regime like Iran, and you can kind of see a form of desperation. The world is not too pleased with them right now after what they've done. Their own people aren't even thrilled. Dozens have been slaughtered for protesting, and even today, citizens continue to rise against their government. When people in power feel boxed into a corner, that is when drastic action comes up. Now, the world can capitalize on that and get them into a better agreement, a better nuclear deal, or they can leave them to their own devices and see what kind of madness will transpire. This is definitely something to keep an eye on going into the future. So, that now brings me to the end of today's conversation. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That will help us grow. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.